A number of parents here today. So I want to ask you this. Imagine that instead of the child or the children that God gave you, He instead gave you the perfect child. I mean, literally, a child that never sinned. Can you imagine what your parenting would be like? I mean, you'd never have a time where you said, "Now come here," and the kid runs the other way. You'd never have a temper tantrum. You'd never have to fight to get them to put their pajamas on or clean their room or do their homework. You would have this child who is just absolutely perfectly respectful and kind and loving and obedient. It'd be like the dream parenting job, right? Couldn't get any easier than that. Or maybe not. You realize that there were only two parents in the history of the world who ever had a perfect child. And even though Jesus was perfectly obedient to everything they said, that doesn't mean their lives as parents were easy. Right? I mean, this week we heard again the Christmas story, and you think of all the things that they went through leading up to the birth of this perfect child. You're pregnant out of wedlock. It's not like Mary, wore this banner that said Mother of God, and everybody just bowed down to her. Whoa, Mother of God. She didn't get to ride like a motorcade from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and everybody pulls over to the side. Oh. It's not like they came to the Bethlehem Hilton and flash their Family of God credit card and you get the honeymoon suite. No, it's the opposite, right? Even though she is carrying in her womb the creator of the universe, she still has to give birth to the sights and sounds and smells of common livestock. That's one of the perks of being the mother of God. But of course, after Jesus was born, then everything got so much easier. I mean, then the wise men show up with all these expensive gifts. Man, maybe Joseph and Mary think, this is awesome, man, we've got it made. We're just going to live here in Bethlehem, in the town of David, with our perfect child for the rest of our lives. Awesome. Maybe not. What Mary and Joseph expected is not what God had planned. God had a different plan. A plan that was designed to fulfill some of the promises that He had made in the Old Testament. A plan that would ultimately benefit Mary and Joseph and really benefit all mankind. Our theme for today is simply this: God carries out His plan. First for His Son, and then for His children. Our text for today picks up shortly after the visit of the Magi. Maybe Mary and Joseph are still admiring all these gifts when suddenly their world is turned absolutely upside down. Matthew records the event. When they, namely the Magi, had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you." Why? "For Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." Whoa. So much for this idyllic existence as the parents of the perfect child. Right? Put yourselves in their shoes. I mean, suddenly to have some deranged madman trying to kill your child. Talk about, postpartum trauma. It's what they're going through. And realize this was not some kind of, senseless paranoia on the part of, this new mother worried about everything. This is a very real threat. I mean, this is King Herod we're talking about. This is the guy who killed his wife and his children because he thought they were a threat to his throne. This is the same Herod who ultimately carries out his plan, his dragnet to try to catch the little king of the Jews by killing every child in and around Bethlehem, age 2 and under. It's this massacre of these innocent children that actually the prophet Jeremiah referred to in the Old Testament. He writes, "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Those words were ultimately fulfilled in this massacre of the innocent children. But you see, even though the most powerful man in Judea was out to snuff out Jesus' life, the most powerful God in the universe had a different plan. A plan to rescue his son. That's why he sends the angel to Joseph and says basically, get out of Dodge right now. Which is what happens. Joseph got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. Certainly one of the reasons that God had Jesus go to Egypt was to protect his life. But that was not the only reason he sent him to Egypt. Matthew tells us, and so was fulfilled what the Lord said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Those words, originally recorded in Hosea chapter 11, were not spoken originally about Jesus. They were spoken about the nation of Israel. Remember when the famine hit the Mediterranean world and the family of Joseph, the sons of Israel, had to flee to Egypt to find food. And then, after they had been there a while, God called them out of Egypt back to the promised land. Well, that event actually was a foreshadowing of this event, where a different family of Joseph had to flee to Egypt so that God could call his son, in this case his only begotten son, out of Egypt. I think it's interesting that you start with this son, namely this imperfect nation of Israel, and it's replaced by another son, the perfect Son of God. It's simply foreshadowing this fact that Jesus is ultimately going to be the substitute for more than just a nation, but all mankind. You see, that was part of God's plan. His plan that would ultimately benefit you and me, his children. Now, after Joseph and Mary spent some time in Egypt, what happened? Matthew tells us. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." In other words, all clear, Joseph. Green light. Go back home. And so he does. Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. Just as a kind of an aside, did you notice that throughout this account, Matthew never refers to Jesus as the son of Joseph? Every time it's always the child and his mother. Just further proof that Jesus is not the biological son of Joseph, but the Son of God. Notice also that when Joseph returns to the land of Israel, it seems that he is planning to go to Bethlehem, to live there, not back into Nazareth, but to Bethlehem. And we might ask, well, why would he go back to Bethlehem? Well, could it be that Joseph figured that's where the Messiah should live, right? Remember when the Herod asked the chief priests, where's the Messiah going to be born? They all answered. They pointed to Micah, the prophecy, in Bethlehem, Ephrathah. Out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. It's not hard to understand why Joseph may have thought, well, if the prophets say he comes from Bethlehem, I better live in Bethlehem to fulfill these promises. But you see, again, what Joseph expected is not what God planned. God had a little different plan for the residence of his son. Matthew tells us, when Joseph heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. So what did he do? Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. Well, that would seem to make sense. I mean, that's where Mary and Joseph had been living originally, where they got engaged. It would be natural to go back to your family and friends. They maybe even had a house left there. But really, they did not return there simply because of convenience or familiarity. They went there to fulfill God's word. God had a different plan. The gospel writer says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. Now you maybe noticed that a number of times here Matthew has pointed back to Old Testament prophecies and pointed out, here's the fulfillment of what the prophets said. And usually it's pretty easy to find those original prophecies, except this one. He will be called a Nazarene. You can look all through the Old Testament, and believe me, I tried. I got my cross-reference out. There's got to be that prophecy somewhere there. It's not there. So the question is, what words was Jesus fulfilling? Well, to understand that, we need to understand something about the connotation of the word Nazarene. In Jesus' day, people from Nazareth, people who were called Nazarenes, were regarded as uneducated, uncultured. I mean, the Jewish elite in Jerusalem would look down on these farmers and fishermen from up there in the backwoods of Galilee. You get a little taste of that when you think about the conversation that the woman in the courtyard had with Peter on the night Jesus died, where she's going, you're one of them. You're with Jesus of Nazareth. I can tell by your accent. Or you think about how the high priests accused the Apostle Paul of being a ringleader of that Nazarene sect. Or even Jesus' own disciple, Nathanael. When Andrew comes to him and says, we found the Messiah, it's Jesus of Nazareth, Nathanael kind of expresses the popular opinion of his day when he says, Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? In other words, in Jesus' day, to be from Nazareth was kind of a derogatory term. People looked down on those people. So the question is, was there anything that the prophets said in the Old Testament that would bear that out in Jesus' life? Yeah, a lot of them. For example, in Isaiah we read, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. The psalmist writes, he is scorned by man and despised by the people. Isaiah again, despised and abhorred by the nations. You see, all those passages find at least partial fulfillment in the fact that Jesus was called a Nazarene. So, what's the point of all this? Simply this. Everything that happened in Jesus' life, I mean, down to the details, even this little bitty slice of his life where they travel to Egypt, and then they come back, and then they live in Nazareth, all of that is part of God's plan. And the fact that that was predicted, it was foretold in the Old Testament, proves that it's part of God's plan. And the ultimate purpose of that plan was to redeem you and me from sin and shame and guilt forever. God fulfilled his plan in Jesus' perfect life, innocent death, and glorious resurrection. God had the perfect plan for his Son. But there's one other thing I want you to take home from this lesson, and it's simply this. Just because a person belongs to the family of God doesn't mean their life is going to be easy. Joseph and Mary is proof. There are going to be plenty of times when we find ourselves in their situation where we think, what? Why is this happening, God? This is hard. People are attacking my family. I have a loved one who might die. Why? I thought you were on my side. Why does this have to be so hard? When those thoughts go through your head, think back to this account. And remember, God has a plan. God will carry out his plan. Now, don't misunderstand me. God doesn't want anybody to sin. That's not part of his plan. It wasn't part of God's plan. God didn't want Herod to kill all those babies. But the fact is, God can use even sin. God can use the toughest of situations in our lives to carry out his plan. God doesn't promise that our lives will be easy. He promises that he will go with us and that he will use them all for our good. God carried out the perfect plan for his Son. And therefore, you can be sure he will carry out the perfect plan for you, his children. Believe him and thank him. Amen. Please stand.